Good afternoon. Today I'm going to tell you something about Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author who is the most famous Puritan of the age and one who has been recognized as the dark romantic, as you will see. He was very much affected by the place where he was born. It's Salem, Massachusetts. And he was also ashamed of his Puritan ancestry because during the infamous Salem trials of 1692, one of his ancestors was a judge at the Salem witch trials, and he was allegedly a very strict judge. So Nathaniel Hawthorne decided, because he was so ashamed, to add the W sound to his surname so as to lose all connection with his ancestor John Hawthorne. So the surname is not the same as he had it before. Let me show you where Salem is situated. You can see the red mark here. Let me just zoom it in. So it is above Boston on the north coast of Massachusetts. So if you probably know about the 1692 witch trials, during which several people were executed for allegedly dealing with witchcraft, and it was a really harsh time to be alive, especially if you were a young woman. Nathaniel Hawthorne led pretty dull and unremarkable life when he went back to his hometown, Salem, after studying for a short period of time. During his studies, his fellow students were Longfellow and Franklin Pierce, who was the 14th American president, and this friendship was important later on in Hawthorne's life. When he went back to his hometown, his father shortly died, and he left his wife and three children behind. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was the only man of the family, so he was pretty much idolized by his sisters and his mother. At one point in his life, he seriously injured his leg, so he was forced to spend a huge amount of time in his room, which he called the haunted chamber. He actually spent 12 years in this solitary room in his mother's household, and the years are usually referred to as his solitary years. Let me show you what he said about this period of time. In this dismal chamber fame was won. If ever I should have a biographer, he ought to make great mention of this chamber in my memoirs, because so much of my lonely youth was wasted here, and here my mind and character were formed. So basically, he's saying that although the 12 solitary years were harsh, he spent this time soul searching. And this is so in accordance with the Puritan tradition. You know, they think about their souls a lot. So this is the period when he became most prolific. Is the period when he wrote his famous short stories and published them. So here you can see the titles of the collections: Twice Told Tales, Mosses from an Old Man's, and The Snow Image. Pay attention to the second title. It's not Moses, dakle nije Mojsije nego Mahovina, so it's Moses. Old Man's je neka stara kuća ili mansion, to bi bio malo duža reč, i inače odnosi se na onu slavnu gotsku ikonu, odnosno mnoge njegove priče, kao vidjet ćete i romani, imaju gotska obeležja, a kuća samo to pojačava. In the preface to his Twice Told Tales, Nathaniel Hawthorne gives us the directions on how to read his works. So let me read you that part. The story collection requires to be read in the clear brown twilight atmosphere in which it was written. If opened in the sunshine, it is apt to look exceedingly like a volume of blank pages, Nathaniel Hawthorne says. This shows you that Hawthorne was focused more on darkness than on sunshine. In fact, he stressed the dangers of being exposed in sunshine. And this is the theme that is ongoing in the Scarlet Letter, which I hope you start reading by now. So please pay attention to the role of darkness and sunshine in the development of Hester Prynne's character. Apart from his tales, he started writing his novels as well shortly. But let me first tell you something about his friendship between himself and Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick. Melville was appalled by the force of darkness in Nathaniel Hawthorne's works. So he praised it in his review of the story Young Goodman Brown by saying, "You would of course suppose that it was a simple little tale, whereas it is as deep as Dante, nor can you finish it without addressing the author in his own words. It is yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin." This is, of course, the sentence which comes from the story Young Goodman Brown. So this year we decided that you should read the excerpts from the novel The Scarlet Letter with Ata in the tutorials, whereas with me you're going to read the story Young Goodman Brown next week in our Google Meet class. Young Goodman Brown is a story which also has certain Gothic elements and supernatural elements, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it right now because we will speak about it as uh, uh, as we read it next week. Let me just single out one sentence which basically summarizes the story. It goes like this: "The fiend in his own shape is less hideous than when he rages in the breast of man." So basically, men or humans are those beings to be afraid of, and not the fiend as we imagine him to be, or the devil, because the scariest form of a devil is the devil which rages inside of a man. You will understand what this means when you read the story, of course. But the preoccupation with the theme of sin and corruption and greed, devil, hell, religion, all these themes are so apparent in Young Goodman Brown, and he's going to repeat them in The Scarlet Letter as well. So this is what affected Melville so much. So he brought this darkness from Hawthorne into his Moby Dick as well. Let me just go back briefly to Hawthorne's life. As you can see here, he uh, became a surveyor in the Salem Custom House in 1846. But after the American election, when the Whigs won in 1848, Hawthorne was expelled from the Custom House because he was a Democrat, and he was very bitter about it. So he exacted his own revenge on the Whigs from the Custom House in the preface to the Scarlet Letter, which is called Custom House. So when you read the novel, do not skip the first part, which is the preface called Custom House, because there you will see many explanations pertaining to how he got to write this story, which is really important when you interpret it later on. Also, in The House of the Seven Gables, which is another one of his Gothic novels, he writes about Judge Pynchon, who is the real life character from Custom House and his chief Whig enemy. Apart from The House of the Seven Gables, which is also his novel, and The Scarlet Letter, he also wrote The Blithedale Romance, which is a really dark story. And these three novels mark him as the dark romantic writer, together with Edgar Allan Poe. You already know his darkness. And of course, later, Herman Melville. Melville was 15 years Hawthorne's junior, so he was younger than him. The House of the Seven Gables is a Gothic novel, as I said. You already see the house, and it describes a New England family living in this house and experiencing strange things. So it's quite scary, and it was inspired by a true house, a gabled house in Salem. Ne znam da li znate ovu reč gable, to se prevodi na srpski kao zabata. To su oni krovčići koji se nalaze na kući. Dakle, ovo bi bila kuća sedam zabata. As for Melville, we can see his admiration for Hawthorne in the dedication of Moby Dick to Hawthorne. This is such an honor, and I'm always odd when I come to this part. And critics also agree that without Hawthorne, Moby Dick would not be what it is today, as you can see here. For example, when we say Melville recognized the darkness in Hawthorne's work and made Moby Dick even darker. Moby Dick is one of the great American novels, and you will see why it is such a masterpiece. So, to finish off this brief lecture on Nathaniel Hawthorne, I will just briefly mention his Puritan heritage as I already mentioned, one of soul searching traditions, but also at the same time, the Puritans were very unfriendly to art, calling art make believe, vanity, greed, because art imitates God's work. So, this is what makes it so bad. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was somewhere in between. Basically, he was in the tradition, as you can see, of the great English romantics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley, and Keats. But he could not allow himself to be so free in his thinking as these five authors were. Because of his Puritan self distrust, he doubted his own talent. And this is what's Puritan about him. But later on, he decided he should write, although in darkness. So here is that summarized. He believed in the doctrine of the fall of man. So he believed in the original sin and that people are not perfect at all. And he accepted dark as, it says here, the more dramatic hue. So evil becomes the aesthetic element that Nathaniel Hawthorne wants to explore. So in my next video, I'm just going to follow up on what I just said about the dark, the sunshine, evil as the aesthetic element in his works, and try to apply that on certain elements from the Scarlet Letter, leaving the most for Asa to discuss with you. And I'm looking forward to reading Young Goodman Brown next week with you and to hearing what you have to say about the effect that it brings us.